9 years ago, he walked away from the woman who raised him today. He came back as a billionaire, but what he found inside a house, it wasn't ready for. A black luxury car rolled slowly into a street that looked like it had been forgotten by time itself. Cracked walls, rusted gates, broken windows, and silence that felt heavier than the air. It didn't belong to his world anymore, yet it once was the only world he knew. Inside the car, he sat still, fingers resting on the leather steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead but seeing far beyond the street in front of him. There was no arrogance in his expression, no pride in his wealth, only something quieter, heavier, harder to face: regret. 9 years ago, he had walked away from this place, and from the woman who once meant everything to him. She wasn't just a maid. She was the one who stayed when everyone else left, and the one who fed him when there was barely enough. The one who told him he mattered when the world treated him like he didn't. Single quotes T. And then, the moment he became successful, the moment he finally had everything he ever dreamed of, he disappeared from her life without looking back. The engine went silent. He stepped out, polished shoes touching the dusty ground, a sharp contrast that didn't go unnoticed. Curtains shifted, doors creaked. Open. Your curious eyes followed him as whispers began to spread. They saw the car, they saw the suit, they saw the man he had become, but they didn't see the weight he carried with every step toward that house. The house stood at the end of the narrow lane, smaller than he remembered, weaker than it should have been. Paint peeled away like forgotten memories, and the door leaned slightly, as if it had been waiting too long. He slowed down. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the past itself was pulling him back, forcing him to remember everything he tried to bury: the laughter, the struggle, the nights she stayed awake just to make sure he was okay. And the day he left without saying goodbye. He reached the door, his hand lifted, but it didn't knock. Not yet. For the first time in years, fear crept into his chest. Not the fear of losing money or power, but something far more personal. What if she wasn't there? What if she was? His breath slowed. His fingers trembled slightly. He closed his eyes for a moment, hearing her voice in the silence. The same voice that once told him he would be something more, and now he was. But somehow it felt like nothing. Without her, his knuckles moved closer to the door, hesitation clinging to every second that passed, because deep down, he knew this wasn't just a visit. It was a confrontation with everything he had run from, and whatever waited on the other side. It wasn't going to leave him the same. His hand finally knocked, once, then again, louder. The sound echoed through the quiet street, pulling every eye toward him, holding every breath in suspense. He waited, and in that silence, one thought consumed him completely. What he was about to find behind that door would shatter everything. He thought he knew, and for the first time since he built an empire, he felt small, like the boy who once stood barefoot in this same place, looking up at her for strength. The door remained closed, but the weight of the moment pressed harder, as if the past itself was about to answer him at last. And nothing would. Bidasani knocked once more, louder this time, the sound sharper, almost desperate as it echoed against the worn wood of the door. Nothing. No footsteps. No movement. No voice calling from inside, just silence. His jaw tightened and he knocked again, harder than before, as if force alone could undo the years that stood between him and this moment. Still nothing. A faint sound behind him made him turn. A door creaked open across the narrow lane, and an older neighbor stepped out slowly, eyes narrowing as they studied him from a distance. There was caution in their posture, curiosity in their gaze. "You're looking for someone?" the neighbor asked, voice careful, uncertain. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before answering, as if saying her name out loud carried more weight than he was ready for. "I'm here for her. She used to live here. She worked for my family years ago." The neighbor's expression shifted almost instantly. The curiosity didn't disappear, but something else replaced it. Something heavier. "You mean?" The neighbor paused, searching his face more closely now. "You're the boy she used to talk about." The word boy hit harder than it should have. His throat tightened. "Yes." The silence that followed was different this time. Not empty, but filled with something unspoken. And that's when he saw it. The neighbor's eyes softened, but not with relief. With pity, a quiet, painful kind of pity that made his chest tighten before a single word was spoken. "She waited for you," the neighbor said finally, voice lower now, slower, as if each word had to be carried carefully. The ground beneath him felt unsteady. "What do you mean, waited?" he asked, though something deep inside him already knew the answer. The neighbor stepped closer, glancing once at the closed door before speaking again. "She talked about you all the time. Said you'd come back one day. Said you were busy, building something big. She was proud of that." Each word felt like a weight pressing down on him. "She never stopped believing you would return." His eyes dropped to the ground, unable to hold the weight of that truth. "I should have come sooner," he murmured. But the words felt hollow even as he said them. The neighbor let out a slow breath. "She didn't blame you," they said. "Not once. Even when things got hard." His head lifted slightly. "Hard. The neighbor's expression tightened again, and this time, there was no hiding it. She struggled, they said quietly. For years, the world around him seemed to narrow, every sound fading into the background as a word settled in. She kept working long after she should have stopped. Cleaning, cooking, anything she could find, but her health. The neighbor paused, shaking the head slightly. It started to fail her. His hands clenched at his sides. "What, didn't anyone help her?" he asked, his voice sharper now, almost defensive. "We tried," the neighbor replied, "more than once, but she refused." "Why would she refuse?" he demanded, frustration breaking through. "Because she said she wasn't alone." The neighbor answered, their eyes locking onto his. "She said she had someone to send, someone who would come back for her." The words hit harder than anything else. He staggered back slightly, as if the truth itself had pushed him. "She believed in you," the neighbor continued, "even when it didn't make sense anymore." His chest felt tight, each breath heavier than the last. "Where is she?" he asked, the question barely steady. The neighbor didn't answer right away. Instead, they stepped aside, gesturing quietly toward the door. "You should go inside," they said. His hand reached for the handle, slower this time, almost afraid of what waited beyond it. The door creaked open with a soft, tired sound. The air inside felt different, still, stagnant. Dust clung to every surface. The furniture looked untouched, frozen in time. A chair near the corner, a small table, faded. Curtains that barely moved. It wasn't just a house. It was a life paused and never resumed. He stepped inside slowly, his eyes scanning every corner, every detail, every memory that refused to fade. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. His gaze moved across the room, until something caught his attention. A small box, placed carefully on the table, not forgotten, not abandoned, preserved. His steps slowed as he approached it, a strange sense of gravity pulling him closer. His hand hovered over the box, as hesitation creeping back in, because somehow, he knew, whatever was inside, wasn't just a memory, it was the truth he had been running from for 9 years. And when he finally opened that box, he realized just how much it had cost her to keep believing in him. His fingers finally touched the box. For a moment, he didn't move, just stood there, staring at it, as if opening it would make everything real in a way he wasn't ready to face. Then slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside, time was preserved. A small stack of photographs rested neatly on top. He picked one up, and the air left his chest in a quiet, broken breath. It was him, years ago, younger, thinner, standing beside her with a shy smile while she stood behind him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, pride shining in her eyes. Another photo, him holding a school certificate. Another, a birthday he barely remembered. He flipped through them, each image pulling him deeper into a past he had abandoned. Each one proof that while he moved on, she never did. Beneath the photos were neatly folded papers. Certificates. Every achievement he had ever earned, carefully saved, protected as if they were priceless, as if they meant everything because to her, they did. His hands trembled now, no longer steady, no longer controlled. Then, he saw it, a letter, worn at the edge, folded more than once, never sent. His chest tightened as he picked it up, his fingers brushing against the fragile paper like it might disappear if he wasn't careful. He unfolded it slowly and began to read. Her words were simple, soft, familiar. She wrote about him, about how proud she was, not just of what he had become, but of who he had always been. She wrote about the boy who never gave up, who kept fighting even when life gave him nothing. She wrote about how she knew he would go far, how she always believed in him, even before he believed in himself. His vision blurred, but he kept reading. There was no anger in her words, no bitterness. She didn't question why he left. She didn't ask why he never came back. Instead, she wrote as if his silence was something she understood, as if his absence was something she had already forgiven. "I know you are busy," the letter read. "I know you are building the life you dreamed of. That is all I ever wanted for you." His grip tightened on the paper. Each word felt heavier than the last. Then the tone changed subtly at first, but enough for his heart to start racing. She mentioned being tired, said her body wasn't as strong as it used to be, said some days were harder than others, and then the truth. She was sick, very sick. The words didn't say it loudly, didn't demand attention, but they were there, hidden between her gentle sentences. Quietly devastating. She never told him. Not once. Not in a call. Not in a message. Not even in this letter. Because she didn't want to burden him. His knees weakened slightly as the realization hit him fully. She was suffering, and she chose silence. For him, he swallowed hard, but the pain didn't ease. Then he reached the final lines. "If you ever come back, don't feel guilty. Just live well. That's all I ever wanted for you." The letter slipped slightly in his hand as his breath broke. Something inside him shattered completely. The walls he had built over the years, the pride, the success, the distance, all of it collapsed under the weight of those words. He sank into the chair behind him, the papers still clutched tightly, his head lowering as the first tear fell, then another dot and another, until he couldn't stop them anymore. A quiet, controlled man, just moments ago, now breaking in the silence of the only place that ever truly knew him. "I should have been here," he whispered, his voice barely holding together. "I should have come back." But the room gave no answer, only the echo of regret. A movement near the door pulled his attention. The neighbor stood there again, this time not alone. A few others had gathered outside, drawn by the presence of the car, by the tension in the air, by the story they were slowly beginning to understand. They didn't speak loudly, just soft whispers, quiet glances, a shared awareness that something important was unfolding in front of them. He wiped his face, but the weight didn't lift. He stood up slowly, the letter still in his hand, and turned toward the neighbor. "Where is she?" he asked again, but this time, his voice carried something else. Feared on the neighbor looked at him and for a moment said nothing, then, quietly, "She passed away," they said. The words didn't land all at once. They sank in slowly, like something too heavy to hit all at once. "Months ago," the neighbor continued, "she got worse." Very quickly, he shook his head, as if rejecting the reality in front of him. "No," he breathed. "No, that's not she was asking for you," the neighbor said gently, but firmly, until the end. The room felt smaller, tighter, like the air itself was closing in around him. "She kept saying your name," they added, "said you would come, said you wouldn't forget her." His chest tightened so sharply it almost hurt to breathe. Every second he had delayed, every excuse, every moment he chose something else over this. It all led here, to an empty house, to a letter that was never sent, to a goodbye he never got to say. He turned away, unable to hold their gaze, and began walking through the house, each step slower than the last. The chair where she used to sit, the corner where she kept her things, the small kitchen that once felt warm, now cold and silent. Every object carried her presence, every corner held her sacrifice, and every memory screamed the same truth. She gave him everything and he gave her nothing in return. His hand brushed against the wall as he walked, steadying, no, himself, but nothing could steady what he felt inside. Because this wasn't just loss, this was something deeper, something permanent. And as he stood there, surrounded by the lives she lived for him, he realized something even more devastating. This wasn't the end of her story. It was only the beginning of a truth he had never understood, and what he discovered next changed the meaning of everything she had done for him. He turned toward the door, the letter still trembling in his hand, every step heavier than the last. There was nothing left to see, nothing left to hold on to except the weight of what he had lost. The silence of the house followed him, pressing against his back as if it didn't want him to leave. But just as he reached the doorway, something caught his eye. A framed photograph on the wall. Slightly tilted, it was one of the pictures from the box, him as a child standing beside her. He paused, staring at it for a moment, his chest tightening again. Then something about it felt off. He stepped closer. The frame wasn't resting flat against the wall. It leaned forward just enough to reveal something tucked behind it. His breath slowed. Carefully, he lifted the frame. There, hidden behind it, was an envelope, old, sealed, intentional. His fingers hesitated for only a second before pulling it free. For a moment, he just stared at it, as if he already knew that whatever was inside would change everything again. Then he opened it. Inside were papers, not letters this time. Documents. He unfolded the first one. Confusion flickering across his face as his eyes scanned the contents. Bank receipts. Small amounts, modest transfers, dates stretching back years. His brow furrowed as he flipped to the next page and the next. Each one told the same story. Money sent regularly, quietly, anonymously. His heart began to pound. "No," he whispered under his breath, shaking his head slightly as if refusing the truth forming in front of him. He checked the account. Details again, and then it hit him. Those weren't random payments. They were sent to him, to his early accounts. To the struggling version of himself he thought had made it through sheer determination and sacrifice. But it wasn't just him. It had never been just him. His hand tightened around the papers as realization crashed into him. She had been sending him money. All those years, when he thought he was barely surviving, when he thought every step forward was his alone. She had been there, quietly, silently, giving. His breathing grew uneven. He flipped through more documents. Faster now, desperation creeping into his movements. There were records of items sold, furniture. Jewelry. Personal belongings. Small pieces of a life turned into money. Turned into opportunity, turned into his future. His legs weakened and he stepped back, barely catching himself on the edge of the table. She sold everything, he murmured, his voice breaking under the weight of it. Every comfort she had, every piece of security, even as her health was failing. She was still choosing him, still investing in him, still believing in him. Tears blurred his vision again, but he didn't wipe them away this time. He couldn't, because the truth was bigger than anything he could contain. He kept searching through the envelope, his hand shaking uncontrollably now, and then he found it, a final document, different from the rest. He unfolded it slowly, his breath caught somewhere between fear and disbelief. It was an offer, a formal one, years old, a chance for her to leave this place, a job opportunity in another city, better pay, better living conditions, a chance to start over, a chance to finally choose herself. His eyes moved to the bottom of the page, declined. Signed in her handwriting. The room spun. She had a way out. She had a chance to change her life. And she gave it up. Firm, because leaving would mean she couldn't watch over him, couldn't support him, couldn't be there, even from a distance. A broken sound escaped his chest as the paper slipped from his hand. He staggered back, his body no longer able to hold the weight of what he had just uncovered. Everything he believed about his success shattered in an instant. The long nights he took pride in, the struggle he thought defined him, the story he told himself about making it on his own. It was never just him, not even close. He sank to the floor. The documents scattered around him like pieces of a truth too big to ignore. A quiet, painful realization settled over him. He wasn't the one who built everything from nothing. She was. Not with money, but with sacrifice, with love, with a belief so strong it carried him further than he ever understood. His shoulders shook as the tears. It came harder now, no longer controlled, no longer restrained. I thought I made myself, he whispered, his voice barely audible. His gaze lifted slowly toward the photograph still hanging above him. But it was always you. Outside, the quiet whispers had grown. Someone had taken out a phone. A camera pointed toward the open door, capturing the sight of a man the world saw as powerful, now broken on the floor of a forgotten home. The story began to spread before he even stood back up. A billionaire brought to his knees, not by loss alone, but by truth, by a love he never fully saw, by a sacrifice he never earned. And in that moment, the power shifted completely. The wealth he carried no longer felt like strength, because the real richness, the kind that changes lives, the kind that builds futures, was never his, it was hers. And as the weight of that truth settled deeper into his soul, one thing became clear. What he did next wouldn't just define him, it would define a legacy. And what he did next made the entire world stop and listen. Days later, the silence of that house was gone. The broken walls, the peeling paint, the emptiness that once held years of quiet sacrifice. All of it began to change, but not slowly, not quietly. The world was watching now. Headlines spread across screens, across cities, across countries. A story that began in a forgotten street had reached millions, not because of wealth, not because of power, but because of something far more rare. Truth. The billionaire who once walked away had come back. And this time, he wasn't leaving. Workers moved in, restoring what had been neglected for years. The house was no longer crumbling. It was being rebuilt, piece by piece, not just with money, but with meaning. But he didn't stop there, because this was never just about a house, it was about her. Within days, the announcement came. He wasn't just renovating the home, he was transforming it into something greater, a foundation, a place for children who had nothing, just like he once had nothing, a place where they would be seen, supported, believed in, a place where no child would feel alone. And he gave it her name, not hidden, not forgotten, but placed where the world could finally see it, where it belonged. The reaction was immediate. The story spread faster than anyone expected. Videos, articles, messages, millions of people watching, sharing, feeling something real in a world that rarely slows down long enough to feel anything at all. They saw the house. They saw the transformation. But more than that, they saw her story. A woman who had nothing, yet gave everything. A woman the world never noticed. Until now, and suddenly, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was being honored, remembered, celebrated. He stood in front of cameras days later, but not as the man the world thought it knew. There was no performance in his voice, no pride in his posture, just honesty, raw and unfiltered. I spent years believing I built my life on my own, he said, his gaze steady but heavy with emotion. I was wrong. The room was silent, not because people were waiting for more, but because they already felt it. She had nothing, he continued, his voice softer now, but stronger in meaning. But she gave me everything. There were no dramatic pauses, no rehearsed lines, just truth. And that truth reached further than any success story ever could. He didn't hide from his past. He didn't deny it. He faced it, acknowledged the years he stayed away, the silence, the absence, and in doing so, he did something more powerful than defending himself. He changed, not with words, but with action. Because this wasn't about erasing what he had done. It was about honoring what she had done and making sure the world never forgot it. The foundation opened weeks later. That children filled the space that once held loneliness. Laughter replaced silence. Hope replaced hardship. And her name stood at the entrance. Strong, permanent, exactly where it should have always been. But even then, something remained unfinished. One quiet morning, away from cameras, away from attention, he stood in front of her grave. No audience, no headlines, just him and her. The letter was in his hand again, worn slightly more now, but still carrying every word she had written. He knelt slowly, placing it carefully against the stone. For a moment, he said nothing. Because some emotions don't need words. They just need presence. Tears fell again, but this time, they were different. Not heavy with regret, but softened by something else. "Peace, I came back," he whispered, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "I'm just sorry it took me this long." The wind moved gently around him, quiet and still, as if the world itself understood the weight of that moment. He stayed there a little longer, not rushing to leave this time, because now there was nothing left unsaid, nothing left undone, only something carried forward, her legacy. And as he stood up, taking one last look before turning away, the truth settled deeper than ever before. Success had never been about money, or power, or recognition. It was about the people who believed in you when you had nothing, the ones who gave without expecting anything in return, the ones who loved you, even when you were gone. Because in the end, the richest people aren't the ones who have the most, but the ones who are loved the most. He snatched her wig off in public in front of his mistress, thinking he humiliated her completely. But what happened next left the entire street and the internet speechless. The street was alive with quiet luxury. Polished storefronts reflected the afternoon sun, heels clicked against marble sidewalks, and conversations blended into a soft hum of status and comfort. People moved with purpose, with confidence, with the unspoken understanding that this was a place where appearances mattered. And then, in a single violent moment, everything stopped. His voice cut through the air, first sharp, loud, unapologetically cruel. "Take it off." Heads turned, conversations died mid-sentence, cameras instinctively lifted. She stood frozen in front of him, her hands trembling at her sides, her breath shallow, her eyes searching his face for something, anything human. But there was nothing. There only anger, only ego, only performance. Without warning, his hand shot forward, and in one brutal motion, he grabbed her wig and ripped it off her head. Gasps erupted like a shockwave through the crowd. The world seemed to pause. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stood there, exposed. Not just her bare scalp, but her vulnerability, her dignity, her private struggle dragged into the light for strangers to consume. For a split second, the silence was suffocating. Then came the whispers. Did he just... Oh my God, this is insane. Phones were already recording. Every angle, every reaction, every second, and he knew it. That was the point. He looked around, almost feeding off the attention, then turned back to her with a smirk that felt colder than cruelty. It felt calculated. "You think you can lie to me?" he shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Walking around pretending to be something you're not?" Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Before she could even process what was happening, he turned and tossed the wig into a nearby trash can like it was nothing. Like it meant nothing, like she meant nothing. And then the camera caught her, standing beside him, the mistress, perfectly styled, impeccably dressed, watching it all unfold with a slow, satisfied smile. Her arms crossed, her posture relaxed, her eyes filled not with shock but with approval. She leaned in slightly, her voice softer but just as sharp. "Maybe now people can see the truth." A quiet laugh escaped her lips, and that laugh cut deeper than the act itself. The woman at the center of it all stood there, shaking. Her body betrayed her, even if her face tried not to. Her eyes glistened, but she refused to let the tears fall. "And here, not like this." The crowd shifted uneasily. Some looked away, unable to watch. Others leaned in closer, drawn by the rawness of the moment. A few whispered words of disbelief, but no one stepped forward. Not yet, because this wasn't just a scene. This was humiliation, carefully staged and publicly executed, and he wasn't done. "You fooled me," he continued, pacing slightly now, his voice rising with each word. "All this time, hiding behind that thing like you're still worth something." Still silence from her, still restraint. The mistress tilted her head, studying her like she was something beneath her. "Did you really think he wouldn't notice eventually?" she added, her tone dripping with mock sympathy. Another ripple of laughter, another crack in the air. But the woman didn't respond. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just stood there, and then, slowly, she lifted her head. Her eyes met his, and something shifted. It wasn't fear, it wasn't shamed. It was something deeper, something steadier, something that didn't belong to this moment of humiliation, something that didn't break up the noise of the crowd, faded into the background as that look settled between them. Because what that man didn't realize is that this wasn't just a woman he was humiliating. This was someone with a past, a truth, and a power that was about to turn his entire world upside down. Before the crowd, before the cameras, before the cruel spectacle that froze an entire street, there was a story no one there could see, because a woman standing in silence wasn't who they thought she was. She wasn't a fraud. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending. She was surviving, long before the polished storefronts and designer heels. Before the man shouting at her became someone with status and power, there was a quieter life built on struggle and sacrifice. And at the center of it stood her. The wig he had just thrown into the trash wasn't an accessory. It wasn't vanity. It wasn't deception. It was survival stitched into strands. There was a time when she didn't need it. A time when her reflection didn't feel like something she had to prepare herself to face. But life doesn't ask permission before it changes everything. The diagnosis came like a storm with no warning. Words from doctors that echoed long after the room fell silent. Treatments that drained her strength, her energy, a sense of control. And slowly, piece by piece, it took something visible or hair. It didn't fall out all at once. It disappeared in quiet, painful stages. Each strand a reminder that something inside her body was being fought. Something relentless. Something unforgiving. Mirrors became enemies. Public spaces became battlegrounds. But she endured. Through the exhaustion. Through the fear. Through nights when sleep refused to come. And mornings when getting out of bed felt like a victory no one else could see. And through all of it, she wasn't alone. At least, not in the beginning, because back then he was different. Before the tailored suits and polished arrogance. Before the crowd knew his name, he was just a man with ambition and nothing else. No connections, no wealth, no power. No power. And she stood beside him. Not behind him, not beneath him, beside him. She believed in him when belief was all he had. When ideas were dismissed, when doors stayed closed, when failure felt inevitable, she stayed. She worked. She sacrificed. She gave more than anyone ever asked her to give. Late nights turned into early mornings. Savings disappeared into risks that might never pay off. Dreams were built from nothing but persistence and trust. And slowly, against every odd it worked. He rose. Opportunities began to open. Money started to flow. The same world that once ignored him began to pay attention. But success didn't just change his circumstances, it changed him. The gratitude faded first, subtle at the beginning, almost unnoticeable. Then came the distance. Conversations shortened. Eyes that once looked at her with warmth now passed over her like she was part of the background. And then came the silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that grows between two people, when one of them decides the other no longer fits the life they've built. By the time the suits got sharper and the rooms got bigger, she was no longer part of the image he wanted to present. And that's when she entered the picture. The mistress. Everything his new world celebrated. Youth, perfection, effortless beauty that didn't carry visible scars. She didn't represent struggle. She didn't remind him of where he came from. She reflected who he wanted to be. And slowly, deliberately, he began rewriting his life. Not by building something new, but by erasing what came before. He stopped introducing his wife in public then. He stopped bringing her at all. Excuses turned into avoidance. Avoidance turned into absence. And absence turned into shame. Not her shame. Her shame is that, ashamed of what she represented. Ashamed of the battles she had fought. Ashamed of the parts of life that weren't polished enough for his new identity. The wig became, in his eyes, something to hide. Not because it was false, but because it reminded him of truth. And today wasn't an accident. It wasn't a loss of control. It wasn't a sudden outburst. It was deliberate. A performance. A public declaration that the past no longer belonged in his present. He didn't just want to leave her. He wanted to replace her. In front of everyone. Erase the old, showcase the new. Rewrite the narrative so completely that no one would ever question it. But something unexpected was already happening. The people watching weren't seeing what he thought they would see. At first, there was shock, confusion, disbelief. But then, something deeper began to settle. Understanding. Because the more they looked at her, the more they realized this wasn't deception. This was resilience. This wasn't someone hiding behind something artificial. This was someone who had fought to stand there at all. And suddenly, the story shifted. The man shouting, posturing, trying to control the narrative no longer looked powerful. He looked small, cruel, exposed in a way he never intended. And a woman he tried to reduce to nothing. She was becoming something else entirely. In the eyes of everyone watching. Not weak, not broken, but unshaken. And what he thought would be the end of her dignity was actually the beginning of his downfall. The moment didn't end. It stretched. Hung in the air like something heavy, something unresolved, something the world itself refused to let pass quietly. Phones were everywhere now. Not hidden, not subtle, raised high, locked in, recording every second, from different angles, different distances. different perspectives but all capturing the same truth. And within seconds, it began to spread. Messages sent, clips uploaded, live stream started. A private act of cruelty had already become public. But what happened next wasn't what he expected, because the crowd didn't laugh. They didn't nod along, they didn't agree, they didn't stay neutral, they reacted. At first it was just a shift in energy, a tension building beneath the surface, eyes narrowing, faces tightening, whispers changing tone. Then someone stepped forward, a woman, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut through everything. "Pick it up." The words landed with weight. The husband turned toward her, surprised not by what she said but by the fact that someone dared to say anything at all. He snapped, almost laughing, as if the idea itself was ridiculous. She didn't move, she didn't back down. "You heard me," she said, her gaze locked on him. "Pick it up." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, and then another voice joined in. A man, standing just behind her, his tone colder, firmer. "You should be ashamed of yourself." That word lingered. A shame that echoed louder than any insult he had thrown moments earlier. The husband scoffed, shaking his head, trying to brush it off like it meant nothing. "This has nothing to do with you people," he said, his voice rising. Again, but there was something different now, something less certain. The mistress stepped forward slightly, her expression tightening as she sensed the shift. "Oh, please," she said, rolling her eyes. "Everyone's being so dramatic. You don't even know the full story." But the problem was they didn't need to, because what they saw was enough. And the more she spoke, the worse it sounded. The more she tried to minimize it, the more it exposed them. The energy had changed out completely. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore, they were judging, and for the first time since it started, he wasn't in control of the narrative. But the most powerful presence in that moment still hadn't spoken. She stood exactly where she had been, still, silent, unshaken. And somehow, that silence had become louder than all of them. It demanded attention. It held space. It forced everyone to wait, because it wasn't empty. It was building. Her hands slowly steadied, her breathing evened out. The trembling that once defined her posture began to fade, and when she finally moved, it wasn't with hesitation, it was with intention. She lifted her head fully now, her eyes clear, her expression calm in a way that didn't match the chaos around her. Then she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. "I didn't lie to you." The words were simple, measured, controlled, but they cut through everything. The husband opened his mouth to interrupt, but something about her tone stopped him. "Not force or thoughty. I never pretended to be something I'm not," she continued, her gaze steady on his. "I told you who I was. I showed you everything, every part of me." The crowd grew quieter with each word. Even the background noise of the street seemed to fade. He just decided it wasn't enough anymore. There was no anger in her voice, no desperation, just truth, unfiltered, unshaken. She took a small step forward, not toward him, but into herself, into her own space. "That wig," she said, her voice tightening just slightly, not with weakness, but with meaning, was never about hiding. A pause. It was about surviving. The words settled over the crowd like something heavy and undeniable. "I wore that wig because I was healing." And then she stopped, just long enough for it to land. Just long enough for the silence to deepen, before she looked directly at him, and delivered the line that shattered everything he had tried to build in that moment. "What's your excuse for what you've become?" No one moved, no one spoke. The world seemed to freeze around that question because there was no answer. The husband let out a short laugh, forced and hollow, trying to reclaim something, anything. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, shaking his head, but his voice lacked conviction now. His posture had shifted. His confidence cracked just enough for everyone to see it. The mistress looked at him, her expression no longer confident, no longer entertained. Uncertainty crept in. Because this wasn't going the way it was supposed to, not anymore. The balance had shifted completely, and online it was already exploding. Notifications lit up screens across the crowd. People refreshed pages in real time. Comments flooded in faster than anyone could read. "Protect her at all costs. This man is disgusting. She deserves so much better." Strangers, thousands of them, watching, judging, deciding, and for the first time, the man who tried to control everything was no longer the one being believed. He wasn't the one being defended, he was the one being exposed. But just when it seemed like public shame was his only consequence, something far more devastating was about to hit him. The crowd's murmurs had barely settled when she moved again, not hesitantly, not with fear, but with deliberate calm. The kind of calm that comes from knowing exactly who you are, and exactly how much power you've carried quietly while the world assumed you had none. He had thought this street, these witnesses, this moment of humiliation, was the climax of her story. He had assumed that a torn wig, a public display of shame, and a few cruel words could erase her, but he had been wrong. He had underestimated her entirely. She reached into her bag, slow enough for everyone to see, and pulled out her phone. Not with desperation, not with panic, but with quiet authority. The same device everyone thought only recorded her humiliation was about to rewrite the story entirely. She tapped a number, pressed send, and for the first time that day, her voice wasn't just being heard, it was commanding. Within minutes, the first ripple hit. Notifications pinged in rapid succession on phones across the street. Not hers, not the crowd's, his. Bank alerts, emails, calls he couldn't ignore. His empire, which he had assumed was untouchable, was already reacting to a single move she had made. He grabbed his phone, frantically swiping, checking messages, ignoring the gathering crowd. But nothing could stop the avalanche. Every alert was another reminder that he had spent years relying on someone he thought weak, someone he thought powerless. And now, every ounce of that misjudgment was turning against him. His face shifted, from disbelief to panic, the kind of panic that freezes a man. A public figure, in place, the mistress, standing beside him, sensed it immediately. Her smile faltered, her smirk faded. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice tight, almost a whisper. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Every call, every notification, every ping of an alert was a hammer striking against the foundation of his carefully constructed world. Contracts froze, bank accounts restricted, legal ownership challenged. Partners and associates he had counted on for loyalty were suddenly unreachable, hesitant, unsure, as if the universe itself had sided against him. And in front of everyone, on this crowded street, the reversal was absolute. The man who had spent months, years even, building a reputation as untouchable, as dominant, as the one in control, was no longer the one wielding power. She was, the wig, once a symbol of what he believed was her weakness, now lay in her hands. Reclaimed, she lifted it from the trash as if lifting a weight she had carried silently for too long. The crowd watched, silent, mesmerized. Her eyes met his, steady, unflinching. Every ounce of the woman he had tried to diminish, every moment of struggle he had ignored, every sacrifice he had taken for granted, now radiated in that gaze. "You threw this away like it meant nothing," she said, her voice calm, almost gentle, but it carried the weight of decades of endurance, "just like you did with me." The crowd held its breath. Every phone, every camera, every witness was now recording more than humiliation, they were recording justice. "But the difference is," she added, holding the wig firmly, letting it be both shield and symbol, "I know my worth." Their words struck harder than any insult he had thrown, harder than any public scorn. They weren't a threat, they weren't revenge, they were truth. And in that instant the narrative had shifted completely, from humiliation to power, from exposure to authority, from defeat to undeniable presence. The man who had thought he controlled the story, controlled the woman, controlled the moment, now watched helplessly as the very world he had tried to impress began to recognize the reality he had denied. Contracts, accounts, reputation, public opinion, all collapsing simultaneously, like dominoes tipped by a hand he hadn't seen, couldn't see, wouldn't have recognized even if he had. And she remained calm. She remained composed. Every detail of her posture, her expression, her collected demeanor, who broadcast the truth he had spent years trying to hide. The crowd, still recording, now captured more than an act of cruelty. They captured the turning of the tide. The street had stopped once when he humiliated her. Now it held its breath as she dismantled his world with quiet precision. And what she did next didn't just end his reputation, it changed her life forever. The street where it all began was no longer the center of attention. The moment had moved beyond the marble sidewalks, beyond the whispers of the crowd, beyond the flashing cameras. It had gone viral, carried across continents, screens, lighting, up in homes, offices, and public spaces with a story that demanded attention. Millions of views poured in within hours, millions of hearts beating in shock, in awe, in solidarity. News outlets picked it up, headlines splashed across websites, on television, in social feeds. Woman stands tall after public humiliation, strength over shame, how she turned the tide. The wife who refused to break. Each article, each clip, each share, amplified the same message. She was unshakable. She was powerful. She was finally being seen not as a victim, but as a force. Social media became her amplifier. The hashtags multiplied. Hashtag she stands, hashtag strength in survival, hashtag unbroken, hashtag know your worth. Comments poured in from strangers around the globe. Encouragement, admiration, empathy. Women shared their own struggles, their own wounds, their own battles, seeing themselves reflected in her dignity. Men and allies praised her courage. Voices that had been silent now found a chorus. Meanwhile, Heath, a man who had thought humiliation could silence her, found himself collapsing under the weight of public scrutiny. Backlash was immediate. Associates and business partners began distancing themselves. Deals that once closed in minutes became stalled. Invitations to events vanished. The empire he had spent years building began to crumble quietly at first, then visibly. His reputation, once carefully curated, was now tainted, his arrogance exposed for all to see. The mistress, whose presence had amplified his cruel theatrics, slipped into the shadows. The spotlight that had once made her seem untouchable now bypassed her entirely, leaving her irrelevant in a world where perception and truth had shifted. And the woman, she rose not through revenge, not through spectacle, not by tearing anyone down, but through purpose. She refused to let the public humiliation define her or dictate her life. Instead, she transformed it into action. She shared her story publicly, candidly, unapologetically. She spoke of illness, of struggle, of healing, of resilience. She gave the voice to those who had been silenced by shame. She advocated for women who battled invisible wars, emotional abuse, insecurity, societal judgment, the scars of past trauma. She founded initiatives to empower those who had been overlooked, underestimated, and underestimated again, programs to help women reclaim their confidence, regain independence, and rebuild lives after hardship. Workshops, mentorships, community support networks, each a brick in a foundation built on strength and dignity. The wig, once a symbol of what he had tried to reduce her to, became a symbol of survival, a testament to perseverance. She wore it when she chose. She left it behind when she chose. It was no longer a mask, it was a reminder of how far she had come, of battles fought, of victories won, that she walked through the streets now with a steady rhythm, head high, shoulders squared, carrying herself with the calm assurance of someone who had faced degradation and emerged unbroken. People noticed, recorded, shared, and applauded not for her appearance, but for her essence, her unshakable resolve, her refusal to be diminished. Whether she wore the wig or not, it no longer defined her. She did. Every step, every word, every act radiated self-possession, dignity, and courage. She had claimed her narrative, her life, her identity, and the final truth that resonated far beyond that street, far beyond the viral videos, far beyond any headline or hashtag, was simple and profound. They tried to humiliate her for what she had lost, but in the end, she showed the world what she never lost: her strength,